being here today. I am speaking from the church sanctuary, and it's just lovely to be here, and I know you're all here in spirit. The opening words this morning are from the late Reverend Howard Thurman, who was one of the foremost Black theologians of the 20th century. He spoke often at Unitarian Universalist communities, and I thought that this one was particularly appropriate as we move into autumn and all of the strangeness of this year. He says, in the stillness of the quiet, if we listen, we can hear the whisper of the heart giving strength to weakness, courage to fear, and hope to despair. And before we move on, think of those words for a moment. The whisper of the heart. Our intuition, if you like, the voice of God or the divine voice, our intuition, whatever it might be, the whisper of the heart giving strength to weakness, courage to fear, hope to despair. And I would say that is part of our work together in ministry. Next.
Welcome everybody to our third virtual service. We're really happy to have you here. I do want to let you know that this service is being recorded, and as it gets recorded, occasionally your video images will be on the recording. So I just wanted to let you know about that. I have three other announcements. First is that Reverend Alex is planning a Sunday pet blessing service for November 1st. He is looking for volunteers to help plan that service, and if you are interested in volunteering to help plan, please text or email him. Thinking about race, Black Lives Matter, and social justice, Reverend Alex would like to discuss how we can move beyond talking into action. Again, if this is a topic that interests you, please contact him. And my last announcement, I'd like to make a plug for next Sunday's service. November 4th's service will be led by musician Matt Meyer. Matt has a degree in hand drumming from the Berklee College of Music, and he has studied music in various international locations. He's performed with many high caliber musicians, such as Ysaye Barnwell, Pete Seeger, Jim Scott, and Peter Mayer, all names that might be familiar to you. For more information before next Sunday, you can visit Matt's website at rhythmrevelations.com, and I'll put that in the chat. rhythmrevelations.com. Okay. If you would read out loud in your homes with me our unison affirmation of covenant and mission. Our covenant is to be a loving, joyful community that nurtures spiritual growth, promotes compassion, social responsibility, and service in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Our mission is to be a faith community devoted to love and respect, reason, and justice.
The chalice lighting words today are from the Unitarian Universalist Philip Randall Giles. We kindle this light as a symbol of the light we would keep glowing in our lives, of appreciation for those who differ, loving kindness for those who suffer, esteem for all who remind us of our heritage and calling as agents of the Most High.
And as you wish, please feel free to sing at home along with me on Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. There's still time to enter joys and sorrows into the chat. I do have one sorrow that I'd like to share, one concern from Fran. Her granddaughter and daughter-in-law tested positive for COVID-19 this week. They are at home recovering, so if you could keep them in your thoughts, I would appreciate that. I'm going to just pause for 10 seconds and see if anybody else writes a joy or sorrow in the chat. And I'd like to light one more virtual candle for all the joys and sorrows left unspoken, but held in our hearts.
And now let us take a time for guided prayer and meditation time. As we all know, the world is in turmoil. We have no idea what will come next. We don't know about our futures. The world is in danger, and we know that. We also know that people are suffering, but also there are many people who are just hanging in there, making life as best they can. You are probably all familiar with something called metta practice or loving kindness practice from the Buddhist tradition. So I'm going to invite us to do a very brief guided meditation using words of loving kindness. There are 4 lines. You don't have to memorize them. In Buddhist tradition, metta practice means that we start with caring and compassion and love for ourselves and move outwards to others. So close your eyes for a moment and say these words after me, either aloud or silent as you wish. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be free from fear. Now imagine our families, family of origin, the families that we call friends, our adopted families, whatever we imagine as family, including the ones we may not like very much. But imagine our families in front of us. Imagine them, whether they're large or small families or whatever ages they may be, whatever they may be as a family to you. Send them these wishes. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be free from fear. And as in the tradition of Tibetan prayer flags, or even the flags that Deb and Dave were able to put outside on the columns of the church outside this building, prayers from the flags go in all directions invisibly throughout the world. So imagine the whole world in your hands, a small orb of blue and brown and white. Imagine all those people, all those beings trying to live their life. And say these words: may all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be well. May all beings be peaceful and at ease. May all beings be free from fear. Let's take a short time of silence. Thank you. So the reading this morning is one of my favorites. It was in a book called Church Works by Reverend Ann Heller, who was a district executive in the days when they had those titles in the Pacific Northwest. And Church Works is basically how to make churches work. And as you might expect, it's a little bit of a task sometimes. And this particular list from the late Edward Harris, who was one of our ministers, is meant to be funny, but see what you think. Real ministers remember everyone's name. Real ministers have actually read every book in their libraries. Real ministers' congregations are always growing. Real ministers know where the church vacuum cleaner is, and I do, by the way. Real ministers make everyone happy. Real ministers don't ever use answering machines, voicemail, or email. Real ministers work only 1 hour a week. It happens to be Sunday morning, by the way. And real ministers always know who's sick or in the hospital. So stay with that reading for just a moment and think about what you think real ministers do and what we're supposed to be like and what we're supposed to remember. Thank you. Oh, well, I see we have, let me see, we have 18 people, but I suspect we have more because we have at least one couple that I know of and maybe some others. But what a wonderful thing to see all of your lovely faces. And I will show this one more time so that you do not forget. Do you remember this place? We'll be back. So thanks for taking your time this Sunday morning to be with us as we move into this new era. So what does a real minister do? And I was thinking earlier last month, you might need a little bit of humor this time of year because it's not been a very fun year. So I thought, well, maybe a light service would be good, but then it started getting more serious on me. So I'm going to try to balance the lightness and the seriousness so that we can get something out of it and maybe laugh once in a while. So what does a real minister do? Well, the list that Edward Harris had is supposed to be amusing, and it is actually longer than the list that I included. His list includes: real ministers have children by immaculate conception. Real ministers never worry about their sermons. Not true. None of it. None of the statements that I've said this morning are at all true. And I'm sure we all know that. But there are some that I want to go into a little more detail about, just in case you might be wondering, well, what does a real minister do? Well, real ministers do work more than 1 hour a week. Full-time, which I've done for many years, it's perhaps 50 to 60 hours a week, depending on circumstances. Half-time, I would say 20, but it's really more like 30. And ministers do the work that needs to be done. And we usually get 1 day off a week. So, like the helping professions and medical professions and so on, we work pretty hard. Now, it is very true that we often do not remember everyone's name unless they have a name tag, or in this case, that they have an identity name on screen. That is very, very helpful. And yes, we do use email, texting, voicemail, and even in a worst case scenario, calling someone on the phone if we have to. It is also true that real ministers need to know where the vacuum cleaner is located for those whoops moments in church. And those aren't the only things we have to find where they are. The light switches. When I got here in August of last year, the light switches were invisible. And I had to wander all over the sanctuary trying to find the light switches here. It was pretty amazing. The chalice light oil here, and so on. And you could see how many scenarios it would be about where does a minister need to know where things are in church. And oh, by the way, the correct church keys for the correct lock. That's another important one. So some of these, even though they're not true, they point to things that real ministers do. Another thing we try to do is, as real ministers, and I'm being serious here now, is we try to balance our personal and family needs with the needs of a congregation or community. And that, for me, this last year, just as for many of you, has been a struggle, because Deborah is back in Oregon and I'm here, and we haven't seen each other since last Christmas. And I'm hoping to be out there for Thanksgiving, but I think this year has put a lot of strain on all of us to be able to manage with our families. And hi, Joyce and Mike. Nice to see you. Another thing that real ministers have to deal with is ministerial educations are not cheap. I remember when I was considering ministry in the mid-1980s, my minister at the time said, if you're going to go to seminary, you've got to be independently wealthy. And I didn't like that idea because, well, I wasn't independently wealthy for one, but it put a price tag on an education that was of compelling interest to me. So I've never been comfortable with that. The majority of us coming out of seminary owe at least $100,000 in student loans. And for me, it's somewhat more than that. It's just part of life as it is. But it's an expensive education. And it costs money, as you know, for us all to live these days. Now, I want to add one more true, this is what a real minister does statement, but I'm going to mention first a story, because you got to have a story. And this is one that I think will explain an important, powerful word that we don't see enough of. And that word is kindness. So I started in seminary in 1988 in Berkeley, California, and in 1990, I was going to do an internship at a church in Reading, Massachusetts. So I packed everything into a pickup truck with a camper on it when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I drive east with fingers crossed that truck would make it and I would make it and I would be ready for my internship. I wanted to go to General Assembly, which that year was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I drove across country, and the day of General Assembly, which would have been late June, I was driving north from Interstate 80 up towards Milwaukee, but I was going through Indiana for some strange reason. And it was about 7:30 in the morning. Nice, beautiful day. And you know, Indiana is pretty, well, flat. And I come up over a short hill, and in front of me, this is what I see. There's a divided highway with 2 lanes on each side with a medium strip, but there are roads that you can drive. Obviously, there are crossroads, and there are no elevated roadways, so you have to take your chances getting across the highway with other traffic. Well, I come up over this low rise, and what I see on a medium strip was a semi-truck, partly very damaged and partly on its side. In the northbound lanes where I'm going, there's a small car that has been ripped in half. And several cars have stopped because it had happened very quickly before I got there. Several cars had stopped. There was a bundle of clothing in the road. So I was at the point of thinking, okay, what do I do? Do I keep going or do I stop? And that's where those words of Howard Thurman came into play. I heard a whisper in my heart that said, strength from weakness, courage from fear. This is what you must do. So I stopped my truck on the side of the road and I walked over, and there was a man standing over the pile of clothing. And as I got closer, of course, I realized it was the body of a man. And I looked at the man who was standing there and I said, does he have a pulse? Is he breathing? And he went, no. And I said, well, if you need to go on your way, I will stay with him. And he said, are you a doctor? And I said, no, I'm a minister. And so I stayed with the man until the ambulance and police came just a few minutes later. And I remember that I had my hand on his head and another hand on his back, and I was doing prayers. I was doing metta practice like we did earlier. I was doing whatever prayers I could think of. And I still remember the man didn't have any signs of injuries, and he had a smile on his face. And his shoes were off his feet, by the way. And to this day, I still remember the smile. And so I stayed with him and did prayers until the ambulance and police got there. And I remember the ambulance opened up and a woman who was a medic got out, and she looked at me questioningly and said, he's gone. And so I left the body to attend to getting on to where I needed to be. But I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is also leave them my name and information in case next of kin need to ever reach me. So there was a guy in the ambulance who took down my information, and I was ready to go. And he turned to me and he touched my arm and said, are you okay? Are you okay? Now, I don't think I was. I think I was pretty much in shock. And I deeply appreciated his words, even though they're probably what he was trained to say. But for that moment, there was an act of kindness that came out of nowhere. Just like I had had an act of kindness that I did by stopping when I really didn't have to. And his act of kindness almost completed a circle. Where I started, maybe started a bit by stopping, where the man had stopped, other people had stopped. But he closed the circle for me by saying, "Are you okay?" I've never forgotten that kindness. That medic was kind. It's not just ordained ministers. The medic was kind. Other people who stopped were kind. And every one of you I'm looking at today, you're kind as well. It isn't just real ministers teach and live kindness, which is what that other statement is that I include. It's more than real ministers teaching and living kindness. You don't have to have a seminary education or a $100,000 student loan cost to be kind. Because that's where we are, and that's what our job is. So why bother to bring it up today? Well, like many of you, I'm concerned about the next 4 months. We have the COVID and flu season coming up. COVID cases are rising across the country, as we know. As Frances mentioned in her sorrow or concern about her family. The November election is coming up, fraught with uncertainty and danger. And if that's not enough, the national reckoning on race is confronting us right now, in front of our eyes and ears. And we cannot turn away from any of these. We are living in an era that is an explosion of living history, right in the moment. And we're right in the center of it. And we have no idea what America will be like in a year. Kindness does not mean complacency. So how in these next few months with the election and all, how do we be kind to those with whom we disagree? Next month, our new Soul Matters series of monthly themes for Sundays and small groups will start. And the theme for next month is deep listening. Deep listening as a spiritual practice. Deep listening to be able to hear others. And deep listening is kindness. It's part of who we become. And so we're going to be doing a spiritual practice of kindness and deep listening this next month. And being able to live and embody kindness means that we have to experience it and use its gifts and be aware of its presence. And so now we're going to talk about it a bit. We're going to have breakout rooms, which we've had the last 2 weeks. And I would invite you to explore 2 questions. And Amy, could you bring those 2 questions up, please? Well, I will say them, and you can use them in whatever way you want. One question is, how has an act of kindness, thank you, what examples of kindness, or what has been an act of kindness that has changed your life sometime in the course of your life? And I suspect we all have some that we recall. And are there any acts of kindness or words of kindness that changed the life of someone you know? So those are 2 possible questions for the breakout rooms, which will happen very shortly. I've asked Amy to figure out a way for me to just access each breakout room to say hi to you folks as a group. But in the meantime, say hi to each other and then share with each other those acts of kindness that have changed your life or changed the life of someone you know. And I thank you for your attentiveness this morning, and it's lovely to see you all now. Okay, I think we're all back together, aren't we? So these chalice extinguishing and closing words from Reverend Teresa Tet Castillo Galado, and she is the one of our ministers in the Philippines. And I thought that this today was appropriate for us. Some come here to be blessed with answers in a tumultuous world. Let us hope too, however, that many of us have been blessed with questions to direct us with a clarity of mind to steer our logic, now add our emotions, toward kindness and justice always. May it always be so.